On record. And so, Tim, during this spotlight on individual companies and their social responsibility practice, we want to highlight some of the ways that what Chandos is doing, and they're doing. You're a great leader in this sphere. What does social responsibility mean to you and your team?
I would say we come at it from a more holistic standpoint. I think a lot of people, when they hear social responsibility, um, they think about volunteering or cutting a check to a charity at the end of the year. I'm a huge proponent of Michael Porter's framework for shared value. The idea of adapting existing business models to solve some of the greatest challenges in society, and in so doing, create differentiation and create incremental profit so you can scale infinitely. That is a very interesting concept to us. We kind of broaden that the term social responsibility to think about, like, what impact does our business model have in the world, both from a planet standpoint, a societal standpoint, and a community standpoint. That's really how we think about it.
So when you talk about this notion of being more holistic, what does that look like to you in terms of the various practices? I mean, again, it's much more than simply cutting checks or sending dollars to different nonprofits.
Yeah. We've been known since the early 2000s for recycling construction waste on our projects. And there's a long story around that, but since early 2000, we've diverted more than 80% of our entire enterprise's waste stream from landfills. And I think it's probably changed a little bit more recently, but something like 40% of the volume of waste in a Canadian landfill comes from the construction industry. So we've been doing that. I think we're the only contractor in Canada that does that. Everyone else waits to be forced to do that by the client or something like that. And there's really no premium cost there. So we're known for that. I'll talk a little bit about social procurement and hiring at-risk youth as a way to build community and society. I'll talk about that in a bit here. And then we also just recently made a commitment to be carbon neutral by 2025, and we're well on our way to that. So those start to be some examples of what we're doing in the space.
One of the questions actually that Kevin raises about being a B Corp. He said, has your company ever considered being a B Corp?
Yeah. So we are the largest B Corp certified contractor in the world. Our score is 107. We actually did a bit of a sensitivity analysis. We think we can get up into the 140 range relatively easily without really changing much in terms of how we operate. A lot of that comes from our ownership structure. We're 100% employee owned, single class of voting shares, the only contractor of any real size that provides equity to carpenters and laborers. And one of the cool things is that less than 35% of the control of Chandos is with the executives. So we very much work for the people who are doing the work: carpenters, laborers, project managers, estimators, superintendents, the receptionist. It drives a very unique culture that we're proud of.
One of the ways that you're demonstrating this holistic approach to social responsibility is also through the Buy Social Pledge. Can you describe more about what that is?
Yeah, I think the best way to kind of start with this is it has a connection to my personal story, and I won't get deep into it, but my story is one of, I would have been in a cardboard box on the street if I didn't figure it out. And frankly, Chandos gave me a chance and an opportunity. I don't know where I would be if Chandos didn't hire me back when I was like 17, turning 18. I've been here for 20 years now. And I found a second family and a deep sense of purpose in the organization because of that. One of the things that we've done more recently is we've been hiring at-risk youth, and we have a need, and we're growing. We're hiring hundreds of people, and we have a need for talent in the organization. So let's hire that kid who's riding the bus back and forth 3 hours a day, working 2 minimum wage part-time jobs, going to high school, trying to put some food on the table for a brother or sister because mom or dad aren't around. Let's hire that kid and put him into our apprenticeship program and set him on a path to a high-paying job in the construction trades. So we can take someone who was on a path towards crime and/or poverty, in a matter of 5 years, give them a high-paying job in the construction industry. and it costs us nothing to do that. And what we get is a highly engaged, motivated workforce, and what Canadian society gets is a contractor that's reducing strain on the Canadian social system. And the federal government kind of started to wake up to this concept in terms of their procurement policy a few years ago. I've done quite a bit of work with David LePage with Buy Social Canada around social procurement and community benefit agreements. And that's the idea of picking your contractor, and say 20% of your selection criteria would be based on what social good can the contractor do in the local community. Ergo, that story I just told about hiring at-risk youth. So we started to be known for that way of being. And SAP from Germany has had a lot of success with social procurement in the UK in particular. And so they had a conversation about making a commitment that 5% of their addressable spend be with social enterprises. We chatted together and we said, yeah, let's do this. And so both of us together made that commitment. And it's been great. Lots of positive feedback. And, that's a lot of influence through both of our supply chains. 5% of that is a lot of money, right? So.
Great. How do you manage all this from a cost perspective? I mean, does going social require a premium?
I would say so for us, definitely not. Now it will, depending on what industry you are in, there is it can be harder. So let's compare and contrast the construction industry and say the software industry. So construction industry, we can take someone from pushing a broom, and that individual can be running the organization and learn entirely on the job. Our chief operating officer has that sort of a story. His name's Sean Penn. He's a great guy. So we can do that. And I think we are kind of uniquely qualified to do that. And we're really just talking about being more intentional about who we hire. If a laborer is going to make $18 an hour regardless, let's hire someone from a equity seeking group. Let's hire someone where we can have an impact on society. So it becomes pretty simple for us. Now in the software business, it'll be a little bit tougher. If you're, Apple or Google or someone like that, you need programmers to have a certain level of knowledge to be able to start. Now, I think it's interesting, and the reason I'm using software as an example is I know the team over at Plato Software Testing in Canada. They're the largest software testing entity in Canada. And they have a network of Indigenous software testers who live in community, who do software testing for the big software giants in the US. So you can even see the big software giants having a push in this direction. They actually formed a group to encourage impact sourcing in their supply chain in San Francisco. So I don't think there's a premium cost when you're thoughtful about how you're doing it.
Sure. You mentioned Michael Porter before and this notion of competitive advantage. How might differentiating based on social provide you a competitive advantage?
For us, the construction industry is not exactly what I would frame as representative of Canadian society. Let's just put it that way. And so when government in Canada started to talk about community benefit agreements and social procurement, the construction industry basically started to light themselves on fire and say, like, well, how dare you tell us who we're going to hire? And, I'm not going to use the names of the folks who said this, but it was said, how dare you force us to hire women in the trades, LGBTQ, Indigenous, New Canadians. If you force us to hire people from those groups, you're forcing us to accept an inferior labor pool. They actually said that. And, the logic is well, those groups will have lower productivity than more traditional hires. And frankly, like that's the most racist thing I've heard in a long time. And so the industry was saying those sorts of things, and government, the largest purchaser of construction services in Canada, is saying, we want to hire contractors who are thoughtful about this. And we said, hey, this is great. So we can fulfill this demand that government has in Canada. And one of these things will not be like the other. And the whole industry can be over there and we're going to be here. It made all sorts of sense. It's the right thing to do. And, to this day, I still get phone calls every 2 or 3 weeks from an owner somewhere in Canada who wants to do social procurement or impact spend sourcing, calling me up for advice because the construction associations aren't there giving them the tools with how to do that. And frankly, I'm more than happy to help them, and we win work because of it. And it's a huge differentiator.
That's great. You mentioned in some ways, you've mentioned this last year during your keynote. Are you seeing the bar being raised by some of these other construction companies with respect to responsible supply chain practices?
Uh, yes. So there's been an absolute, let's call it tsunami of awareness in the broader business community, right? So Navigator is one of the largest PR firms in Canada. They launched the Center for the Canadian Center for the Purpose of a Corporation, the Business Roundtable in the United States, the United Way in the Lower Mainland of British Columbia has the Center for Social Purpose. Business leaders are waking up to this. So many of our competitors all of a sudden woke up and now they're publishing ESG reports and what have you. I would say that is positive movement, and I think that's great. But I would also say that the number of organizations that are really authentically doing it is still quite low. And I think that real differentiation will only accrue to those who are actually doing it. And so back to our example of making a public pledge to do 5% of our addressable spend with social enterprises, that is proof that you're doing it. Being a B Corp is proof that you're doing it. The glossy mailer or brochure about the donations that you did in the year, I think is great. And the donations are great for charity, but it's not the same. And I think the market knows it's not the same. I would say that in the construction space, there are a couple of contractors that we have seen really stand up on this. So Darwin Construction in Vancouver is one. Westcor in Calgary is another. And even the big guys like Ellis Don and PCL are doing some great stuff on a project by project basis. We just haven't seen the tipping point yet, for lack of a better term.
For sure. Yeah. I've got a question here from one of the participants. Cody, go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, so how do you feel about the government restricting contracts to contractors based off of basically the diversity of their workforce? How do you feel that affects smaller contractors in the workforce who are only made up of 2-3 people, but can't get contract because they don't fit that diversity checklist?
Yeah. Okay. So a couple things. So there has to be a principle of fair and transparent procurement with government. So on the CBA file, the province of British Columbia got sued, and I think rightly so, for the Patillo Narrows Bridge, where they conflated a community benefit agreement with a PLA, a project labor agreement. And that was sole sourcing a particular union to provide all of the labor on the project. That is not fair and transparent procurement in my view. Now, back to a small, medium enterprise who is being asked to demonstrate a community benefit through their work, it all comes down to the detail around what counts. And my other comment would be is that many in the construction industry jump to an assumption that we're talking about a better way of coming at, jump to an assumption that is harder to meet than it actually is, or they assume that we're talking about affirmative action. So as an example, in the city of Vancouver's CBA policy has a long list of what counts. And one of the things of what counts is a small and medium enterprise, defined as anything less than 100 employees. And that is about 60% of every subcontractor that exists in Canada. And so these policies give recognition to the fact that while the contractor may not be as diverse as one would like in terms of Canadian society, they are local. They are providing jobs in the local community. They're often family owned, and they're delivering value to the local community. So in many instances, organizations who would think that they wouldn't be able to participate actually can participate and actually are differentiated because of that. I don't know if that answers your question there, Cody, but.
It gives me an idea. It gives me an idea.
Yeah, I would say from a policy standpoint, I think it is good and healthy policy for various levels of government to remove barriers to equitable participation in the supply chain. There are systemic barriers there that need to be overcome, and I don't think they will be overcome in the absence of good policy from various levels of government.
Okay.
We have a couple minutes left here, Tim. How does that, I mean, tying into Cody's question there, how does, or how do collaborative construction approaches basically integrate various types of contractors regardless of the size?
Okay, yeah, the best way I would kind of answer that is most people think that construction contracts for general contractors are procured on a lump sum basis. Go hire a designer, they'll do a design, get 3 contractors to give you a price, pick the guy with the lowest price. That used to be the way it was. Now, that's a ridiculous way of picking a contractor because you're picking the contractor on the basis of who missed the most on the drawings. So there's more nuance to it than that. Most procurement these days is done on the basis of hiring the general contractor to be a trusted advisor. We're at the table at an open book basis, and we actually go out and procure on behalf of the client 85 to 90% of the cost of the project. Most of this stuff gets subbed out. So we go out and we do that. And so when an owner chooses a lump sum delivery method, the general contractor has very few options in terms of who they can bring to the table from a social enterprise standpoint. When it's a collaborative delivery method, the general contractor can give advice to the owner on how to engage more social enterprises. And so the example I have of that is we're doing First and Clark in Vancouver. It's the replacement of the downtown East Side's drug detox facility, and it's got transitional and affordable housing. It's 86 million bucks. We're using a delivery method called integrated project delivery. That method allows us to bring the social enterprises to the table before the design is even advanced. And we can very much align the design with the capabilities in the local market, and therefore maximize our ability to go into the local supply chain and work with social enterprises. And so on that project, it's 86 million is the contract value. We've made a commitment to source 10% of the contract value with local social enterprises, so 8.6 million. You also made a commitment to demonstrate that we've done that at no premium capital cost to the taxpayer. The client and ourselves have both engaged Simon Fraser University, and they are studying the project so that they'll be able to issue a report partway through construction, at the end of construction, that certifies, for lack of a better term, that we actually did do what we said we were going to do. And then that kind of research will be used with owners in Canada to disabuse them of the view that this would cost the Canadian taxpayer more.
That's great. Well, thanks very much. We're at the end of our time now. Thanks, Tim, so much for sharing and spotlighting what Chandos is doing in this area, that it's much more than simply, again, writing checks, that it's very much involved in a holistic approach. And thanks, too, for all the participants for being part of this. You see in the chat there the link back to SwapCard, and we'll have basically the keynote panel where actually Tim will be there with Andy Corber speaking about Indigenous inclusion and beyond. So thanks very much again, and we'll see you back in SwapCard.
Have a good day, everybody.